Hello there, my dear companion for tonight's journey. Welcome back to Boring History to Sleep To. I'm so glad you've chosen to be here with me in this quiet moment of your day. Wherever you are on this blue-green planet of ours, whether it's dawn breaking golden outside your window, afternoon light filtering through your curtains, purple twilight settling over your neighborhood, or the deep hours when the world belongs to night owls and insomniacs, I invite you to find yourself a comfortable position. Let the burdens of today, those lingering thoughts and worries, gently dissolve like morning mist. Let your blanket embrace you and allow your pillow to become your softest, most understanding friend. You don't need to do anything at all. You don't need to try to listen. You don't need to remember a single detail. Your only task tonight is simply to relax, to take a deep breath in and let it out slowly, slowly. Let my voice become a gentle stream, carrying you away from our noisy, frantic 21st century, drifting back to a time long past. Tonight, we're going to push open together a great oak door, weathered by time and softened by moss, stepping into a world we usually only imagine in shades of gray and brown, a world of castles and kings, peasants and plagues, of chivalry and superstition. We call it the medieval period, or the Middle Ages. When we think of this era, our minds often paint pictures of hardship and endless toil. And yes, life for most people was anything but easy. But even in the harshest conditions, amid war, disease, and oppression, the human spirit has always found ways to shine. Like wildflowers pushing stubbornly through cracks in stone, medieval people, just like us, discovered ways to entertain themselves, to find joy, to temporarily escape reality. And that's our topic tonight: the strange pleasures of medieval people. Some of them might feel familiar to you, but others are so bizarre, even dangerous, they'll seem almost impossible to believe. So let's leave behind our glowing screens, our endless notifications. Let me, your faithful chronicler, tell you about how lords and ladies, knights and serfs, jesters and serving girls tried to inject a little joy into their difficult lives. If you enjoy these gentle historical tales that bring the past to life in unusual ways, I humbly invite you to subscribe so you won't miss our future sleep-inducing journeys into yesteryear. But you don't need to worry about that right now. The only thing to do is let go. Close your eyes and allow my words to begin weaving vivid pictures in your drowsy mind. Let's begin, shall we? The oak door is creaking open, and as we step across the threshold, we find ourselves standing on a hill overlooking a vast valley. The June sky stretches endlessly blue above us, dotted with lazy white clouds, but the air below is far from peaceful. It trembles with anticipation, alive with an energy you can almost taste. A temporary city of canvas has sprouted in the valley below. Hundreds of tents in every color imaginable: deep blue, crimson red, golden yellow, each bearing its own coat of arms, its own symbol of noble heritage. Banners and pennants flutter in the breeze like enormous butterflies. The air fills with a beautiful chaos of sound: voices laughing and calling, horses whinnying, the ring of hammers as blacksmiths repair dented armor, and above it all, an almost tangible sense of expectation. You're witnessing one of the greatest entertainment spectacles of the medieval world, a tournament. This isn't the carefully choreographed display you might see at a Renaissance fair today. No, this is the original, raw, brutal, and far more dangerous. It's equal parts elite sporting event, elaborate fashion show, and massive organized brawl. But before we dive into that world of clashing steel and thundering hooves, let me paint you a picture of the quieter moments too. Because medieval entertainment wasn't just about spectacle and danger. It was also about gathering around a fire on a cold night, the soft click of wooden game pieces, the gentle plucking of a lute's strings, the whispered telling of an old story that's been passed down through generations. Tonight, we'll explore it all, from the grand and glorious to the simple and profound, from the violent clash of armored knights to the delicate art of falconry, from the raucous festivals where peasants became kings for a day, to the quiet corner of a tavern where a traveling musician might change the course of history with a song. So, settle in deeper, my friend. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed, as if you're sinking gently into the softest feather bed. The weight of the modern world is lifting from your shoulders like a heavy cloak being removed. In just a moment, we'll join those colorful crowds in the valley below. We'll feel the excitement, the danger, the sheer spectacle of medieval entertainment. But first, take one more deep breath with me. In and out, and let yourself drift back 700 years to a time when entertainment could literally be a matter of life and death. Chapter 1: The Theater of Blood, Honor, and Shining Armor. Picture yourself standing on that grassy hill, looking down into this sprawling valley. The morning mist is just lifting, revealing the full scope of what lies before you. This temporary city of silk and canvas stretches as far as you can see, a rainbow of colored pavilions, each flying its family's proud banner. The air hums with preparation. Squires, young boys barely into their teens, scurry between the tents, carrying polished pieces of armor that catch the sunlight like mirrors. The metalwork is extraordinary, each piece hand-forged, fitted precisely to its owner's body, decorated with intricate engravings that tell stories of battles won and honors earned. You can smell wood smoke from 100 cooking fires, the rich aroma of roasting meat, the earthy scent of thousands of horses, and underneath it all, something harder to define: the metallic taste of anticipation, of danger willingly embraced. This is the tournament season, and you're about to witness something that defined medieval entertainment for centuries: the ultimate test of skill, courage, and sheer luck. But tournaments weren't always the relatively civilized affairs they would later become. In their earliest form, they were called melees, massive mock battles where teams of knights would clash across miles of countryside, trying to capture each other for ransom. Imagine a football game, but with real weapons, real injuries, and real money at stake. The only rule was that you weren't supposed to kill your opponents. Accidents, however, happened with disturbing regularity. The church tried repeatedly to ban these events, calling them a senseless waste of life. But the nobility's passion was too strong. They simply ignored the papal decrees. Gradually, rules evolved to make the contests somewhat safer. The one-on-one joust became the main event, two knights charging at each other with long wooden lances, trying to knock each other from their horses. Now, let me tell you about the most famous participant in these dangerous games. Among all the gleaming knights gathered in this valley, one figure stands apart, not because his armor is more golden or his horse larger than the rest. He stands apart because of his reputation. His name is William Marshal, and to the people of his time, he was nothing less than a medieval rock star. But William's path to glory began in the most dramatic way imaginable. Born the fourth son of a minor noble, he was essentially a spare heir in a family with too many mouths to feed. When he was just a small boy, no more than 5 or 6 years old, he became a pawn in a political conflict that would determine whether he lived or died. His father, John Marshal, had switched sides in a civil war, betraying King Stephen. In retaliation, the king took young William as a hostage, threatening to launch the boy from a trebuchet, a massive stone-throwing machine, if John didn't surrender his castle. Picture this scene: a tiny boy standing before this enormous siege engine, its wooden arms towering above him like the limbs of some mechanical giant. But instead of crying or begging for mercy, young William began picking wildflowers from the grass around the machine's base. When the king asked what he was doing, the boy looked up with complete innocence and said he wanted to play a game. That moment of pure, fearless curiosity, or perhaps just childish oblivion to danger, melted the king's heart. William was spared. That same boldness would define the rest of his life. Sent away to train as a knight, William discovered he had a natural gift with lance and sword. But what made him truly wealthy and famous were the tournaments themselves. You see, tournaments weren't just about glory. They were about money. Lots of money. When you defeated an opponent, you won everything: his horse, his armor, his weapons, and often a hefty ransom for his freedom. For a fourth son with no inheritance, tournaments were the path to riches, and William Marshal was a master of this dangerous game. Let me paint you a picture of what a joust actually looked like, sounded like, felt like. The list, that's what they called the tournament field, has been carefully prepared. A long, straight track stretches across the valley floor, with a low wooden barrier running down the center to keep the charging horses from colliding head-on. On either side, wooden stands have been erected for the noble spectators. Ladies in flowing gowns of silk and velvet sit under colorful canopies, their headdresses adorned with gauze veils that flutter in the breeze like butterfly wings. The crowd falls silent as two knights take their positions at opposite ends of the field. These aren't the clumsy, impossibly heavy suits of armor from movies. This is sophisticated military technology, each piece precisely engineered for maximum protection with minimum weight. The knights can move, bend, even mount their horses unassisted. William Marshal sits astride his destrier, a massive warhorse specially bred for combat, standing over 6 feet tall at the shoulder. The horse itself is armored, its head protected by a steel chanfron that makes it look like some mythical beast. William's lance, 12 feet of ash wood tipped with a steel point, rests in a socket at his stirrup. Across the field, his opponent makes final adjustments to his grip. Both men have spent hours in preparation. Their armor has been polished to a mirror shine, every strap, and buckle checked and double-checked. Their horses have been carefully warmed up, trained to charge straight ahead regardless of what's coming toward them. The herald raises his horn to his lips. The silver notes cut through the air like a blade, and suddenly the valley erupts in controlled chaos. Both horses launch forward simultaneously, their hooves drumming against the earth in an accelerating thunder. Dust rises in clouds behind them. The knights lean forward in their saddles, their lances dropping to horizontal, aimed at each other's shields. The distance closes with terrifying speed. 50 yards, 30, 20, 10, and then comes the impact. The sound is unlike anything in our modern world. Imagine the crack of lightning, but deeper, more visceral. It's the sound of 12 feet of solid wood exploding into splinters against a steel shield. It's the screech of metal on metal. It's the grunt of a man having the wind knocked out of him by a blow that would kill an ordinary person. More often than not, one or both knights would be catapulted from their saddles, crashing to the ground in an avalanche of metal. Squires would rush out to help them to their feet, checking for serious injuries. Broken bones were common. Concussions were routine. Death, while not the goal, was always a possibility. But when both knights remained seated, when both lances shattered but neither man fell, the crowd would erupt in appreciation. This was skill of the highest order. William Marshal was legendary at this deadly game. Historical records suggest he won nearly 500 tournaments during his career. While that number might be exaggerated by medieval chroniclers who loved a good story, there's no doubt about his extraordinary skill. He wasn't just strong, though he was certainly that. He was intelligent about combat. He studied his opponents, learned their weaknesses, developed tactics. He knew exactly where to aim his lance to achieve maximum impact while maintaining his own balance. He could read the subtle signs that told him when an opponent was favoring an injured shoulder or when a horse was tiring. Each victory brought him prize money, captured equipment, and most importantly, reputation. Gradually, from a penniless fourth son, he became wealthy. Kings and princes wanted him in their service. Ladies admired him. He became the living embodiment of knightly ideals. There's a wonderful story about Marshal that perfectly captures the brutal reality behind the glamour. After winning a particularly fierce tournament, he wandered through the town still wearing his helmet, which had been so badly dented in combat that he couldn't remove it. He had to find a blacksmith, lay his head on the anvil, and let the smith hammer the helmet back into shape while it was still on his head. Imagine that scene. The greatest knight in the world sitting in a blacksmith's shop, his head ringing like a bell, as the smith carefully hammered away the dents that were trapping him inside his own armor. It's both heroic and absurd, a perfect reminder that even the most glorious medieval pursuits had their deeply inconvenient moments. But as the sun begins to set over our tournament valley, as the last echoes of combat fade and the merchants pack up their wares, a different mood settles over the scene. The armor comes off, revealing tired, bruised bodies underneath. The horses are led away to be cared for, their flanks steaming with sweat, and their eyes still wide with the excitement of battle. The knights gather in small groups around their pavilions, sharing wine and recounting the day's most dramatic moments. They've danced with death and emerged victorious. For them, this was entertainment at its purest. a test of everything they'd trained for, a chance to prove their worth in front of the people who mattered most. The ladies retired to their chambers, their silk gowns rustling softly as they walk. Tomorrow, some of them will tie their colored scarves to a knight's lance as a token of favor. Tonight, they'll dream of the thunder of hooves and the crash of splintering wood. But for us, here in the safety of our modern world, we might feel a little grateful that our entertainment doesn't require wearing 60 pounds of steel and charging at someone with a 12-foot spear. We can appreciate the courage, the skill, the sheer spectacle of it all, while acknowledging that perhaps we've evolved beyond the need to risk our lives for applause. As the torches begin to flicker in the growing dusk, as the sounds of celebration gradually give way to the peaceful sounds of night, let your mind begin to drift away from this world of clashing steel and thundering horses. The tournament is ending, the crowds are dispersing, and a gentle quiet is settling over the valley like a soft blanket. But our journey through medieval entertainment has only just begun. From the public arena where knights sought glory, we are going to venture into the private hunting grounds of the nobility, where a different kind of deadly game was played out beneath the green canopy of ancient forests. Take a deep breath with me now, in and out, and let yourself drift deeper into relaxation as we leave the tournament grounds behind. The excitement is fading, your heartbeat is slowing, and ahead of us lies the mysterious world of the medieval hunt, where danger wore a different face, and where one young duchess would find both her greatest joy and her ultimate fate. Chapter 2. The Call of the Green Woods and Wings Against the Sky. If the tournament ground was a public stage where knights performed for crowds of cheering spectators, then the private forests of the nobility were an entirely different theater, intimate, exclusive, and in their own way, far more revealing of medieval character. These weren't the public commons where peasants might gather a few fallen branches for their fires. No, these were carefully managed royal hunting preserves, stretches of ancient woodland that belonged exclusively to the crown and the highest nobility. Here, among towering oaks that had stood for centuries and dense thickets that hadn't felt the woodsman's axe in decades, the medieval elite played out their own elaborate drama of power and pleasure. Hunting was never just about putting meat on the table, though venison was certainly a prized delicacy at any noble feast. The hunt was a complex ritual that served multiple purposes. It was military training disguised as sport, a way to display wealth and status, and most importantly, a method of asserting dominance over the natural world itself. Imagine yourself as a guest at one of these royal hunts. You've been invited to join the retinue of a powerful duke, and the experience begins long before dawn breaks over the forest canopy. You're awakened while the stars are still bright overhead, roused by servants carrying flickering candles and steaming bowls of warm, spiced wine to fortify you against the morning chill. The air is crisp and clean, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and rich soil, the green smell of a forest that has never known the plow. As you dress in your finest hunting attire, woolen clothes dyed in deep forest green or rich brown, cut to allow freedom of movement while still displaying your wealth and status, you can hear the excitement building outside. The sound that dominates everything is the baying of the hounds. These aren't ordinary dogs. These are the stars of today's performance, bred and trained with the same care that goes into raising the finest horses. There are massive staghounds, powerful enough to bring down a full-grown deer. There are boarhounds, fearless enough to face the razor-sharp tusks of a wild pig. And there are smaller, quicker harriers, bred to chase down rabbits and foxes. Each pack is cared for better than most peasants. They have their own handlers, their own sleeping quarters, their own carefully prepared meals. Some noble families spent more on feeding their hunting dogs than they paid their human servants. These animals represent not just utility, but prestige. A well-trained pack of hounds was a status symbol as important as a fine suit of armor or a library of handwritten books. The hunting party assembles as the first pale light begins to filter through the canopy. Lords and ladies emerge from their pavilions dressed in their finest outdoor clothing. The ladies riding side saddle on specially trained palfreys, their long skirts arranged gracefully to one side. The men sit astride larger horses, some carrying hunting spears, others preferring to rely on their bows. At the head of the party rides the master of the hunt, a professional who has spent days, perhaps weeks, preparing for this moment. He knows every deer path in these woods, every stream crossing, every rocky outcrop where a wounded animal might make its stand. He has studied the habits of the particular stag they're pursuing today, a magnificent creature with antlers that span wider than a man's outstretched arms. The horn sounds, a long, melodious note that echoes through the trees like the voice of the forest itself, and suddenly the quiet morning explodes into chaos. The hounds are released, and they pour through the underbrush like a living river, their voices joining together in a symphony of excitement. They've caught the scent, and nothing can stop them now. The hunting party follows, horses crashing through the bracken, voices calling out to each other as they try to stay together in the dense woodland. This is hunting at its most primal, a thunderous chase through ancient trees, leaping fallen logs, splashing across streams that run dark with fallen leaves. The air fills with the sound of hooves on earth, the crash of branches, the constant music of the hounds, and over it all, the periodic blast of hunting horns as the riders try to coordinate their pursuit. For the animal being hunted, let's say it's that magnificent stag, this must be a nightmare of sound and fury. But for the hunters, this is pure exhilaration. This is what they live for, the perfect marriage of skill, courage, and luck, played out in a natural amphitheater that makes every tournament ground look pale and artificial by comparison. The chase might go on for hours, covering miles of difficult terrain. The hunters must display all their horsemanship skills, reading the landscape, anticipating where the quarry might go, staying close enough to the action to participate, but not so close that they interfere with the hound's work. Eventually, inevitably, the pack will corner their prey, perhaps at a stream crossing or against a rocky outcrop where the animal can go no further. And then comes the moment that defines the entire exercise: the kill. This isn't random violence. This is ritual. The lord or lady who has been given the honor of the final blow must do it with skill and precision. A clean kill is not just practical, it's a demonstration of competence, of worthiness to hold power over both animals and people. After the kill comes another elaborate ceremony. The stag is butchered on the spot according to ancient traditions. The finest parts, the heart, the liver, are cooked immediately over an open fire and fed to the hounds that have earned them. The rest of the meat will return to the castle for a great feast, but the ritual sharing with the dogs is crucial. It acknowledges their partnership in this ancient dance of predator and prey. But not all hunting was this thunderous and dramatic. There was another form of the sport that required entirely different skills: patience instead of speed, delicacy instead of power, a profound understanding between human and animal, rather than simple dominance. This was falconry, and it was considered the most refined of all hunting arts. Picture a different scene entirely. Instead of the chaos of the hunt we just witnessed, imagine a young woman riding slowly across a broad meadow, her horse moving at an easy walk. The morning mist is just lifting, revealing the golden stubble of recently harvested grain. Somewhere in this peaceful landscape, hidden among the tall grasses, rabbits and partridges are going about their morning routines, unaware that death is circling high above them. On the woman's leather-gloved arm sits a peregrine falcon, one of nature's most perfect killing machines. Its head is covered by a small leather hood, intricately decorated with silk embroidery and tiny silver bells. This hood isn't decoration. It keeps the bird calm and focused, preventing it from being distracted by random movements until the crucial moment arrives. The woman is Mary of Burgundy, one of the wealthiest and most powerful heiresses in 15th century Europe. She inherited vast territories that stretched across what we now call Belgium, the Netherlands, and parts of France. She could have any entertainment money could buy: the finest musicians, the most elaborate tournaments, the most exotic foods from the far corners of the world. But her true passion is falconry. This sport requires a completely different set of skills from the thunderous chaos of the stag hunt. Success depends on the relationship between falconer and bird, a partnership built over months or even years of patient training. The falcon is never truly tamed. It's simply convinced that cooperation serves its interests. Every time it returns to the falconer's glove, it's making a choice to do so. Mary has been training with birds of prey since childhood. She understands their moods, their needs, their incredible capabilities. A peregrine falcon can reach speeds of over 200 miles per hour in its hunting dive. Faster than any land animal. Faster than most things humans have ever created. When it strikes its prey, the impact is so violent that the victim often dies instantly from the force alone, before the talons even penetrate. But this morning, Mary isn't hunting with a peregrine. Today, she's flying a goshawk, a forest hawk known for its intelligence and adaptability. Unlike the peregrine, which hunts in open sky, the goshawk is designed for woodland work. It can thread through trees at full speed, making split-second adjustments to catch prey that thinks it's found safety in dense cover. The goshawk sits calmly on Mary's glove, occasionally turning its fierce yellow eyes to scan the landscape. These birds see the world differently than we do. They can detect the slightest movement from enormous distances, pick out the shape of a hiding rabbit from a confusion of brown grass and shadows. Mary spots movement in a patch of brambles ahead, probably a rabbit that thinks it's well concealed. She gently removes the hood from her bird's head, and instantly the goshawk's demeanor changes. Its head swivels, focusing on the same patch of vegetation with laser-like intensity. For a moment, both hunter and bird are perfectly still, perfectly focused. This is the essence of falconry, not the chaotic energy of the hunt, but this crystalline moment of shared purpose between human and raptor. And then Mary raises her arm, and the goshawk launches itself into the air. Watch it fly. This isn't the straight-line approach you might expect. The hawk knows that direct attack rarely works against prey that has good cover. Instead, it flies a wide circle, gaining height, positioning itself so that it can attack from the direction the rabbit least expects. The rabbit, sensing danger, freezes. This is its primary defense, to remain motionless and hope its camouflage is sufficient. For long seconds, the tableau holds. The hidden rabbit, the circling hawk, the mounted woman watching with expert eyes. Then the goshawk folds its wings and drops. The attack is over in less than 2 seconds. One moment, the rabbit is crouched in what it thinks is safety. The next, it's pinned to the earth by talons that can exert pressure of over 400 pounds per square inch. There's no struggle, no suffering. The strike is too precise, too overwhelming. Mary spurs her horse forward, calling softly to her bird. The goshawk, with its prey secured, flies back to her glove for its reward, a small piece of fresh meat that she's carried for exactly this purpose. This is the crucial moment in falconry. The bird must be rewarded immediately for its success, reinforcing the partnership between human and raptor. This is hunting at its most elegant, a collaboration between species that represents thousands of years of careful breeding and training. The goshawk gets an easy meal. Mary gets the deep satisfaction of participating in one of nature's most perfectly evolved predator-prey relationships. But falconry wasn't just a European passion. In the vast steppes of Mongolia, the Khans of the great nomadic empire had developed their own version of this art, though on a scale that would have astonished even the wealthiest European nobles. Mongol falconry didn't involve the relatively small hawks and falcons that European nobles prized. The Mongol Khans flew golden eagles, massive birds with wingspans that could reach 8 feet across and talons the size of a man's hand. And they didn't hunt rabbits, they hunted wolves. Imagine that scene, a Mongol hunter on horseback, galloping across the endless grassland with a golden eagle the size of a small child perched on his arm. When they spot a wolf pack in the distance, the eagle is released to attack from above while the hunter charges from ground level. The eagle would strike the lead wolf, driving it to the ground with the sheer force of impact, allowing the hunter to close in for the kill. This was falconry as warfare, a demonstration of the absolute dominance that the Mongol Khans claimed over all living things. It was hunting elevated to the level of military strategy, using the fastest, most powerful predators on Earth as living weapons. But here's something that might surprise you. Medieval falconers were some of the world's first veterinarians. Caring for birds of prey required an incredibly sophisticated understanding of avian anatomy, nutrition, and psychology. Falconers developed surgical techniques for treating wing injuries, dietary regimens for keeping birds in peak condition, and training methods that were based on a profound understanding of raptor behavior. Some falconry manuscripts from the period read like modern veterinary textbooks, with detailed instructions for treating everything from parasites to broken bones. Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor, wrote a falconry manual in the 13th century that was so advanced it remained the definitive text on the subject for over 300 years. These hunters weren't just sportsmen, they were scientist practitioners of an art that required encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world. But passion, no matter how refined, can be dangerous. And for Mary of Burgundy, the pursuit she loved most would ultimately cost her everything. On a March morning in 1482, Mary rode out from her castle near Bruges for what seemed like a routine falconry expedition. She was only 25 years old, recently married to Maximilian of Austria, mother to two young children, and ruler of some of the richest territories in Europe. She had everything to live for. The morning was crisp and clear, perfect weather for flying her birds. Mary was an experienced rider and an expert falconer. She'd been doing this since childhood, and she knew her horse as well as she knew her own hands. But horses, no matter how well trained, are still animals. And animals can be startled by unexpected sounds, sudden movements, things that we'll never understand. We don't know exactly what spooked Mary's mount. Perhaps it was a rabbit bursting suddenly from cover, or the shadow of one of her own hawks passing overhead. Maybe it was nothing more than a gust of wind that caught the horse wrong. What we do know is that the horse stumbled, and Mary was thrown. In our modern world, such a fall might mean a broken arm, perhaps a concussion. But Mary was riding in the medieval fashion, wearing heavy skirts that could tangle, sitting on a saddle that offered little security for a sudden emergency. When she hit the ground, her own horse, panicking, trampled her. The injuries were devastating. Her back was broken, her internal organs crushed. She was carried back to her castle, but there was nothing medieval medicine could do for wounds so severe. After 3 weeks of agony, the young duchess died, leaving behind a political crisis that would reshape European history. The woman who had found her greatest joy in the perfect partnership between human and bird, who had mastered one of the most demanding sports of her age, was killed by the very passion that had defined her life. Her death sent shockwaves across Europe. She had been one of the most important political figures of her time, and her passing left her vast territories disputed between France and the Habsburg Empire. Wars would be fought over her inheritance. Treaties would be signed and broken. The map of Europe would be redrawn. All because of a riding accident during a morning's sport. Mary's story reminds us that in the medieval world, entertainment and danger were never far apart. The same activities that brought the greatest joy could also bring sudden death. The sports that defined noble status were the sports that could just as easily destroy those who practiced them. But perhaps that's exactly what made these pastimes so compelling to medieval people. In a world where life was already uncertain, where disease and war and simple accidents could claim anyone at any time, there was a certain honesty in choosing entertainments that acknowledged danger rather than hiding from it. They found beauty in the partnership between human and hawk, knowing that partnership could end in disaster. They found joy in the thunder of the hunt, knowing that joy came with real risks. They lived their pleasures fully because they understood, in a way that we've largely forgotten, that pleasure and danger are often the same thing. As the shadows lengthen across Mary's hunting ground, as the last hawks return to their perches and the horses are led back to their stables, we can feel the day drawing to a close. The air grows cooler, filled with the evening scent of wood smoke from distant chimneys and the rich smell of earth settling into dusk. The elaborate world of noble hunting, The pageantry, the danger, the sophisticated partnership between human and animal is giving way to something quieter, simpler, but no less important to medieval life. We've seen how the wealthy and powerful entertained themselves, how they used sport to display status and court death for pleasure. But what about everyone else? What about the vast majority of medieval people who would never own a falcon or ride to hounds? They too had their pleasures, their festivals, their moments of joy stolen from lives of hard labor. And in some ways, their entertainments were more honest, more communal, more purely joyful than the elaborate death games of their social superiors. So let the hunting horns fade into memory. Let the image of hawks circling against blue sky dissolve like a dream. Our journey is taking us away from the private forests of the nobility, down muddy roads to village squares where different kinds of music are playing, where different stories are being told, where ordinary people have found extraordinary ways to transform hardship into celebration. Feel your breathing slow and deepen as we transition from this world of hawks and horses to something warmer, more communal, more recognizably human. Your body is relaxing more completely now, settling deeper into comfort as we prepare to explore the surprisingly rich entertainment world of medieval common folk. Chapter 3: Laughter in the Mud and Game Boards by the Fire. If you were a peasant in 13th century England, your life was governed by two immutable forces: the sun and your lord. You worked from sunrise to sunset, plowing, sowing, harvesting. Most of what you produced belonged to someone else. Your days were measured in the rhythm of seasons, the demands of crops, the endless cycle of labor that kept medieval society functioning. Life was harsh, often brutally so. You lived in a one-room cottage with a dirt floor and no windows, sharing the space with your animals during the coldest months. Your diet consisted mainly of bread, porridge, and whatever vegetables you could grow in your small garden plot. Meat was a luxury reserved for special occasions, if you were lucky enough to have special occasions at all. So where did joy come from in such a life? How did people who owned almost nothing, who lived always on the edge of hunger and hardship, manage to find reasons to laugh, to celebrate, to feel truly alive? The answer lies in something the medieval world had in abundance, something we've largely lost in our individualistic age: community and community celebration. And most surprisingly of all, officially sanctioned opportunities to turn the entire social order completely upside down. The Church, for all its stern control over medieval life, inadvertently provided dozens of holidays throughout the year: saints' feast days, religious festivals, harvest celebrations. The medieval calendar was dotted with occasions when ordinary work stopped and something magical was allowed to happen. Picture a feast day in a typical English village. The date is December 28th, the feast of the Holy Innocents. But the peasants who are gathering in the village square aren't thinking much about religious significance right now. They're thinking about the pig. It's been roasting over an open fire since before dawn, funded by contributions from every household in the village. The smell of roasted pork, a scent most of these people encounter maybe 3 or 4 times a year, fills the air and draws everyone from their cottages like a magnet. Barrels of ale have been rolled out from the manor house, a rare gesture of generosity from the Lord. But more likely, these have been brewed by the villagers themselves, using grain they've carefully saved and hidden from the tax collectors. The ale is strong, cloudy, and tastes like liquid bread. After a year of drinking mostly water and weak beer, this festival ale goes to their heads quickly. Musicians appear, perhaps traveling minstrels, who've timed their arrival to coincide with the celebration. Or more likely, local people who've pulled out instruments that spend most of the year hidden away. A fiddle made from a wooden box and horsehair strings. A simple drum fashioned from a wooden frame and stretched animal hide. Someone has brought a set of bone pipes that produces a haunting, reedy melody. And then the dancing begins. This isn't the elegant choreographed dancing of the noble courts. This is pure physical expression. Men and women linking arms in great circles, spinning until they're dizzy, stomping their feet in rhythm with the music. Their shoes are wooden clogs or simple leather boots that make satisfying thumping sounds against the hard-packed earth of the village square. Children run between the dancers, shrieking with excitement. Dogs bark and get underfoot. Someone inevitably drinks too much ale and starts a good-natured wrestling match that draws cheers and bets from the crowd. The young men of the village take this opportunity to show off for the young women, competing in feats of strength, contests of archery, races that send them careening through the narrow village streets. The young women pretend not to watch while watching everything, whispering and giggling in groups, weaving flower crowns even in the middle of winter with whatever greenery they can find. For one day, the grinding poverty and endless labor are forgotten. For one day, the village becomes a place of music and laughter and abundance. For one day, these people who own almost nothing possess something that money can't buy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. But some medieval festivals went far beyond simple celebration. They became opportunities for social rebellion, for turning the rigid hierarchy of medieval society completely on its head. And surprisingly, these revolutionary celebrations were not only tolerated by the authorities, they were actively encouraged. Let me tell you about the Feast of Fools. This extraordinary festival, celebrated around the time of the winter solstice, was one of the most remarkable social phenomena of the medieval world. For a few days each year, usually between Christmas and New Year's Day, the normal order of society was not just relaxed, it was completely reversed. In churches across Europe, the lowest-ranking clergy took control. Junior priests, altar boys, even the children in the choir would elect one of their number as a boy bishop, or Pope of Fools. This mock bishop would be dressed in real episcopal robes, seated on the real bishop's throne, and given complete authority over the cathedral for the duration of the festival. And what did they do with this power? They turned religious ceremony into comedy. Picture the scene inside a great cathedral. Let's say Notre Dame in Paris. The soaring stone arches that normally echo with solemn chanting now ring with laughter and deliberately ridiculous songs. The boy bishop, perhaps a 12-year-old altar boy named Pierre, stands at the lectern wearing bishop's robes that are far too large for him, delivering a sermon that consists entirely of jokes and satirical observations about the regular clergy. The junior priests sing the sacred liturgy, but they've changed all the words to create elaborate puns and double entendres. They play dice on the altar itself, the ivory cubes clicking against the stone where the holy bread is normally placed. Instead of burning expensive incense, they might burn old leather shoes in the censers, filling the cathedral with clouds of acrid, stinking smoke. Some celebrations became even more outrageous. The clergy might parade through the streets in women's clothing, or stage mock weddings between priests who had taken vows of celibacy. They would crown a lord of misrule, whose job was to command everyone to do the opposite of what they normally did. To our modern sensibilities, this seems shockingly irreverent, almost blasphemous. How could the medieval church, which controlled so many aspects of daily life with such rigid authority, permit such obvious mockery of its most sacred rituals? The answer reveals something profound about medieval understanding of human nature. Church authorities recognized that people need release valves. They understood that absolute authority, maintained without any outlet for criticism or rebellion, eventually becomes brittle and breaks. By permitting, even encouraging, these brief periods of chaos and mockery, they actually strengthened their control during the rest of the year. The Feast of Fools was a safety valve, a way of allowing dangerous social pressures to dissipate harmlessly. For a few days, everyone could laugh at bishops, mock priests, and imagine a world where children gave orders to adults. And then, when the festival ended, normal hierarchy resumed. But with the tension diffused, the system refreshed. It was brilliant social engineering, disguised as mere entertainment. One of my favorite stories from these festivals involves a cathedral in northern France where the boy bishop tradition got slightly out of hand. The children, drunk on their temporary power, decided to improve the cathedral's famous collection of religious relics. They solemnly blessed a collection of chicken bones, declared them to be the remains of saints, and began selling miraculous cures to visiting pilgrims. The real bishop returned from his enforced vacation to find that his cathedral had become famous across the region for its powerful new saint, Saint Rooster the Magnificent, whose holy drumsticks were reportedly curing everything from headaches to infertility. It took weeks to convince people that they had not, in fact, been healed by the mystical power of Sunday dinner leftovers. But medieval entertainment wasn't all festivals and temporary chaos. Much of it was quieter, more intimate, the kind of pastimes that filled the long winter evenings when darkness fell early and there was little work that could be done by firelight. When the sun set and the family gathered around their small hearth, when the animals had been fed and the doors barred against the cold night air, medieval people turned to games. Not the elaborate board games we might expect, carved from exotic woods and decorated with precious stones. The games of common people were simpler, made from whatever materials were at hand. A chessboard might be nothing more than squares scratched into a piece of wood or carved into a stone bench. The pieces might be whittled from scraps of wood, or simply colored pebbles gathered from a riverbank. But the game that appears everywhere in medieval Europe, carved into cathedral steps, scratched onto monastery benches, etched into the stones of castle courtyards, is something called nine men's morris, or mill. This is a game of perfect simplicity and surprising depth. All you need is a board with 3 concentric squares connected by lines, and 18 pieces, 9 for each player. The pieces can be anything: stones, twigs, carved bone, even dried beans. The goal is to arrange your pieces in rows of 3 while preventing your opponent from doing the same. Nine men's morris appears in every level of medieval society. Kings played it in royal courts with pieces made of gold and silver. Monks played it in monastery gardens with pieces carved from prayer beads. Peasants played it with whatever they could find, sometimes carving the board directly into their cottage's dirt floor. The game has a meditative quality that's perfect for long winter evenings. It requires concentration and strategy, but not so much that it prevents conversation. Families would gather around the fire, the older children learning the game from their parents, while stories were told and the day's events discussed. And where there were games, there was inevitably gambling. Medieval people would bet on anything: dice games, card games, contests of skill, or pure chance. They would wager the few coins they possessed, or more commonly, household goods, tools, even clothing. The local tavern, if the village was large enough to have one, became the center of this gambling culture. Men would gather after a day's work, nursing cups of ale that might have to last them all evening, playing games of chance with dice carved from animal knuckle bones. These weren't the precisely manufactured dice we know today. Medieval dice were often handmade, slightly irregular, carved from whatever bone was available. This gave them character. Each die had its own personality, its own tendency to favor certain numbers. Experienced gamblers would develop preferences for particular dice, claiming to understand their individual quirks and behaviors. Arguments would inevitably break out. Accusations of cheating, disputes over the rules, disagreements about whether a die had landed properly or needed to be rolled again. Sometimes these arguments would escalate into actual fights, with men rolling out into the muddy village street to settle their differences with their fists. But more often, the disputes would be resolved with laughter and another round of ale. These were, after all, neighbors who would have to work together, live together, depend on each other for survival. A gambling debt or a disagreement over a game couldn't be allowed to destroy relationships that might mean the difference between life and death when the next crisis struck. It's fascinating to think about these simple pleasures when we compare them to our modern entertainment options. Today, we carry in our pockets devices that can connect us to virtually unlimited music, stories, games, and social interaction. We have access to entertainment options that medieval people couldn't have imagined in their wildest dreams. Yet something has been lost in this abundance of choice. Medieval entertainment was almost always social, communal, shared. When people gathered to play Nine Men's Morris or sing songs around a fire, they were creating bonds that strengthened their community. Their entertainment brought them together, rather than isolating them in individual experiences. There's something to be said for the intimacy of learning a song by listening to someone else sing it, rather than downloading it from a digital library. There's value in games that require you to look into another person's eyes, to read their expressions, to engage in the kind of subtle psychological warfare that only happens when real humans are sitting across from each other. Medieval people had to create their own entertainment from whatever materials were available to them. In doing so, they developed creativity, resourcefulness, and social skills that our convenience-driven culture sometimes struggles to maintain. But perhaps I'm being overly nostalgic. Medieval people would certainly have appreciated the comfort and convenience of modern entertainment, just as we can appreciate the creativity and community spirit that their limitations fostered. Once or twice a year, the insular world of the medieval village would be broken open by something that brought the wider world directly to their doorsteps: the traveling fair. The arrival of a fair was announced days or weeks in advance by heralds who rode from village to village, proclaiming the dates and location. The excitement this generated was extraordinary. For people who might never travel more than 20 miles from their birthplace, the fair represented everything exotic and wonderful that existed beyond their immediate experience. Merchants would come from hundreds of miles away, bringing goods that seemed almost magical: silks from the Byzantine Empire, spices from the Indian Ocean, glassware from Venice that seemed to capture and hold sunlight itself. For a few days, a muddy field would be transformed into a cosmopolitan marketplace where you might hear a dozen different languages and see people wearing clothes in styles you'd never imagined. But the fair wasn't just about commerce. It was a festival, a carnival, a temporary city dedicated entirely to pleasure and wonder. Performers would arrive with the merchants, acrobats who could walk on their hands or balance on tightropes stretched between trees, jugglers who could keep 6 balls dancing in the air simultaneously, fire eaters who would gulp down burning torches and breathe out clouds of flame. There were dancing bears, massive creatures that had been trained to stand on their hind legs and sway to music played on pipes and drums. To modern sensibilities, this represents obvious animal cruelty. But to medieval audiences, who had rarely seen wild animals of any kind, a dancing bear was nothing short of miraculous. Traveling theater companies would set up temporary stages and perform religious dramas called mystery plays. These were elaborate productions that told stories from the Bible, but with a twist. They were performed by members of various craft guilds, and each guild was responsible for particular scenes that related to their trade. The Shipwrights Guild would perform the story of Noah's Ark, naturally. The Bakers Guild would stage the Last Supper. The metalworkers might take responsibility for depicting the crucifixion, since their expertise with iron would be useful for creating realistic-looking nails and spears. The special effects in these productions were remarkably creative, given the limitations of medieval technology. Hell might be represented by a giant papier-mâché head with hinged jaws that could open and close to swallow sinners. Angels would wear wings made from goose feathers attached to wooden frames. The actor playing King Herod might rage so violently that his fake beard would become tangled in his crown, creating unintentional comedy that the audience loved. For peasants whose regular diet consisted mainly of bread, porridge, and vegetables, the fair offered exotic foods: honeyed nuts, spiced wine, meat pies filled with ingredients they couldn't identify but found delicious. These treats might represent a month's worth of careful saving, but the fair only came once or twice a year. It was worth the expense to taste something that reminded you that the world contained pleasures beyond your daily experience. And for the children, the fair was pure magic. They would follow the performers around like disciples, learning juggling tricks and trying to coax the dancing bears into responding to their own clumsy dance steps. They would spend hours examining the merchants' wares, touching silks and spices and foreign coins, imagining the distant lands these treasures had come from. When the fair finally packed up and moved on to the next town, it left behind a village that felt somehow smaller and more ordinary than it had before. But it also left behind stories that would be told and retold through the long winter months. Stories of the fire eater who accidentally set his own hair ablaze, of the acrobat who fell from his tightrope into a pile of horse manure, of the dancing bear that escaped its handlers and wandered through the village square before being recaptured with the help of a strategically placed honey cake. These stories became part of the village's collective memory, entertainment that could be enjoyed again and again, long after the original event had passed. In a world without books or newspapers, where most people couldn't read even if such things had been available, these shared stories were precious cultural treasures, passed down from one generation to the next like valuable heirlooms. As the embers in the cottage fireplace burn lower, as the last of the ale is finished and the gaming pieces are put away for another night, we can sense the daily rhythm of medieval life reasserting itself. Tomorrow will bring more work, more responsibilities, more of the endless cycle of labor that keeps this medieval world functioning. But tonight has been different. Tonight has been about laughter around the fire, about games that bring people together, about stories that transform ordinary events into memorable adventures. Tonight has been about the fundamental human need to play, to imagine, to find joy, even in the midst of hardship. The peasants, whose entertainment we've been observing, understand something that we sometimes forget in our modern world of infinite options and instant gratification, that the best pleasures are often the simplest ones, and that shared joy is more valuable than individual pleasure. Their games are simple, but they create genuine connection between people. Their stories are basic, but they build communities. Their festivals are brief, but they provide memories that last for years. As we prepare to leave this world of village squares and cottage firesides, as we drift toward the next chapter of our medieval entertainment journey, let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel your body relaxing more completely, settling into the warmth and comfort of your modern bed. We've seen how the powerless found ways to claim temporary power, how the poor created wealth in the form of shared experience, how people with very little managed to generate extraordinary richness in their emotional and social lives. Next, we'll explore the world of those who lived between the extremes of wealth and poverty, between the stability of village life and the luxury of noble courts. We'll meet the traveling entertainers, the professional performers who made their living by bringing joy to others, who carried stories and songs and skills from one end of Europe to the other. These were people who owned nothing but their talents, who lived by their wits and their ability to make others laugh, cry, or simply forget their troubles for a little while. They were the bridge between the grand entertainments of the nobility and the simple pleasures of the common folk, and their stories are among the most fascinating in all of medieval history. Close your eyes now and let the warmth of that cottage fire follow you into dreams of simpler times, when entertainment meant looking into another person's eyes across a game board, when laughter was something shared rather than consumed. Chapter 4: The Wandering Merrymakers and Songs That Never Die. On the dusty, muddy roads that connected the scattered settlements of medieval Europe, there moved a special class of people who belonged everywhere and nowhere. They owned no land, claimed no permanent home, carried no family names that meant anything to the record keepers of their time. Their possessions were whatever they could carry on their backs. a lute with 3 strings still intact, a set of colorful but patched clothes, a few juggling balls made from sewn leather and filled with dried beans, or perhaps a small wooden box containing carefully guarded tricks of their trade. And so our journey through the strange and wonderful world of medieval entertainment draws to a close. The tournament grounds are empty now, their colorful pavilions struck and packed away, leaving only a field of trampled grass under the starlight. The hunting horns have fallen silent in the deep woods where Mary of Burgundy once flew her beloved hawks. The village squares are quiet, their festival fires burn down to cold ashes, and the wandering minstrels have moved on down roads that stretch into darkness, carrying their songs and stories to distant towns we'll never see. We've traveled together through 7 centuries of time, you and I. We've watched knights dance their deadly ballet in honor and steel. We've seen nobles pursue their elegant and dangerous sports through ancient forests. We've joined peasants in their brief, precious moments of celebration and release, and we've followed the wandering entertainers who carried joy from one end of the medieval world to the other, living by their wits and their ability to make strangers laugh. What have we learned in our wandering? What can these long-dead people teach us about the nature of pleasure, of community, of what it means to be human? Perhaps the most striking thing about medieval entertainment is how different their world was from ours, and yet how familiar their deepest needs remain. They lived in a time when a simple cut could lead to death, when winter meant hunger for many, when the average person might never travel more than 20 miles from their birthplace. They inhabited a universe where the church controlled much of daily life, where social hierarchy was rigid and inescapable, where most people owned almost nothing and had no voice in the decisions that shaped their existence. Yet even in this harsh world, perhaps because of its harshness, they found ways to create beauty, laughter, wonder, and joy. They transformed their limitations into opportunities for creativity. They built communities of celebration that transcended the boundaries of class and status. They developed entertainments that acknowledged the reality of danger while refusing to be paralyzed by fear. Their tournaments were deadly, but they were also magnificent displays of skill and courage. Their hunts were brutal, but they were also expressions of the deep human need to engage with the natural world. Their festivals were brief interruptions in lives of hard labor, but they created memories and bonds that lasted for years. Their traveling entertainers lived precarious lives, but they also lived with a freedom that most medieval people could only dream of. In our modern world, we've gained so much that medieval people could never have imagined. We live longer, healthier lives. We have access to education, entertainment, and opportunities that even the wealthiest medieval noble couldn't have conceived. We can communicate instantly across vast distances, travel to the other side of the world in a matter of hours, and carry in our pockets access to virtually all human knowledge. But perhaps we've also lost something that medieval people understood instinctively. They knew that the best entertainments were shared experiences, that joy multiplied when it was divided among friends, that the most memorable pleasures were often the simplest ones. When they gathered around a fire to play Nine Men's Morris or listen to a storyteller, they were creating something that our individual, screen-based entertainment struggled to replicate: genuine human connection. When they joined hands in a circle dance or raised their voices together in a drinking song, they were building community in ways that social media, for all its connectivity, can't quite match. They understood that entertainment should bring people together rather than isolate them, that the best stories were ones that could be shared and retold, that true pleasure came not from passive consumption, but from active participation in the joy of others. This isn't to say that we should romanticize the medieval world or ignore its very real hardships and injustices. Life was genuinely difficult for most medieval people in ways that would be unacceptable to us today. Their entertainments often reflected the brutality and inequality of their society. Their sports were frequently dangerous, their social structures oppressive, their worldview limited by superstition and ignorance. But within those constraints, they created something remarkable, a culture that valued community celebration, that found ways to temporarily invert social hierarchies, that allowed even the powerless to experience moments of genuine freedom and joy. They knew how to make much from little. They could create a feast from simple ingredients, transform a village square into a theater, turn a few carved wooden pieces into an evening's entertainment. They understood that the most sophisticated technology is useless without the human imagination to give it meaning and purpose. Perhaps most importantly, they recognized that entertainment serves essential human needs that go beyond mere distraction or pleasure. Their tournaments weren't just displays of martial skill. They were opportunities for young men to prove their worth and establish their identities. Their festivals weren't just breaks from work. They were communal celebrations that reinforced social bonds and shared values. Their stories weren't just amusing diversions. They were ways of passing down cultural wisdom and helping people make sense of their world. In our age of infinite entertainment options, we might benefit from remembering some of these medieval insights. Not every pleasure needs to be elaborate or expensive to be meaningful. Not every entertainment needs to be perfectly safe to be worthwhile. Not every story needs to be new to be worth telling again. Sometimes, the simplest pleasures are the most profound. A conversation with a friend, a game played across a wooden board, a song sung together, a story that helps us understand something about ourselves or our world. Sometimes, the best entertainment is the kind that brings us closer to other people rather than isolating us in individual experiences. The medieval people we've met tonight, William Marshal with his dented helmet, Mary of Burgundy with her beloved hawks, the nameless peasants dancing in their village squares, the wandering minstrels carrying songs and stories from town to town. They're all gone now, returned to the dust from which they came. But their legacy lives on in every human gathering where people choose to create joy together rather than consume it alone. Their tournaments evolved into modern sports. Their festivals became our holidays and celebrations. Their traveling entertainers became our actors, musicians, and comedians. Their simple games became the elaborate entertainments we enjoy today. The essential human impulses they expressed, the need to play, to compete, to celebrate, to tell stories, to create beauty from ordinary materials. These remain unchanged, despite all our technological progress. So, as you lie here in your comfortable bed, in your safe and warm room, surrounded by conveniences that medieval people could never have imagined, perhaps you can feel grateful, not just for how far we've come, but for how much we still share with those long ago people who found ways to laugh and dance and celebrate even in the midst of hardship. Perhaps tomorrow you might choose to play a simple game with a friend rather than staring at a screen alone. Perhaps you might tell a story instead of watching one. Create music instead of just consuming it. Gather with others to celebrate something instead of experiencing entertainment in isolation. Or perhaps you'll simply remember that the same impulses that drove medieval people to their strange and wonderful entertainments still live within you. The need for community, for beauty, for laughter, for stories that help make sense of the world, for moments of pure joy that transcend the ordinary concerns of daily life. The oak door through which we entered this medieval world is closing now, its ancient hinges creaking softly in the gentle night air. The candlelight that illuminated our journey is guttering low, the wax pooling in warm golden drops that will harden and be forgotten by morning. Your breathing is slow and deep now, your body heavy and relaxed, your mind drifting peacefully between waking and sleeping. The stories we've shared tonight are becoming dreams, the voices of long-dead minstrels blending with the sound of your own heartbeat, the distant echoes of tournament trumpets fading into the whisper of air moving through your lungs. Let yourself sink deeper into comfort now, deeper into the soft embrace of sleep. Let the medieval world we've explored together recede like a tide, leaving behind only the gentlest memories, the warmth of a fire shared with friends, the satisfaction of a game well played, the magic of a story perfectly told, the simple joy of human voices raised together in laughter or song. Sleep now, dear friend, and may your dreams be peaceful. May they be filled not with the harsh realities of any particular time or place, but with the timeless human capacity for joy, for creativity, for finding light in darkness and laughter in the midst of tears. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey through the strange and wonderful world of medieval entertainment. Thank you for allowing me to share these stories with you. These glimpses into lives lived centuries ago by people who were, in all the ways that truly matter, not so different from ourselves. Until we meet again in another time, another place, another collection of stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Sleep well. Sweet dreams of distant castles where no battles are fought, only songs are sung. Sweet dreams of ancient forests where the only danger is the beauty of morning light filtering through leaves. Sweet dreams of village festivals where every dance is perfectly choreographed by joy itself. Sweet dreams of wandering roads where every destination is exactly where you need to be. Rest now in the peace that comes from knowing that human beings have always found ways to create wonder from whatever materials they had at hand, and that the same creative spirit that brought joy to medieval people lives on in you. Good night, my friend. Sleep well. These were the professional entertainers of the medieval world, the minstrels, troubadours, jongleurs, jesters, and animal trainers who lived entirely by their ability to make other people laugh, cry, wonder, or simply forget their troubles for a little while. Imagine one of these wandering performers arriving at a village tavern on a cold October evening. His name, let's call him Geoffrey, isn't recorded in any historical document because people like Geoffrey rarely left written records. He's traveled nearly 50 miles in the past week, walking mostly, occasionally catching a ride on a merchant's cart, in exchange for entertainment during the journey. Geoffrey's clothes mark him immediately as a performer. His tunic is dyed in bright blue, a color that requires expensive imported dyes, far beyond what his current wealth could afford, but essential for his profession, because drab colors make for forgettable entertainments. The tunic is carefully patched in several places with contrasting fabric, but the patches themselves are sewn in decorative patterns that turn necessity into artistry. Slung across his shoulder is his most valuable possession, a lute that belonged to his father and his father's father before that. 3 generations of traveling musicians have worn smooth grooves in its wooden neck with their fingers. It's missing one string, and another is frayed nearly to breaking. But Geoffrey guards this instrument more carefully than a knight guards his sword, because without it, he has no way to earn his bread. But sometimes, very rarely, talent and luck could combine to lift a performer from this uncertain existence to heights that would have been unimaginable at the start of their career. And perhaps no story illustrates this better than the extraordinary life of Thomas Becket. Born around 1118 in London, Thomas was the son of a Norman merchant, respectable enough, but hardly noble. He was intelligent, charming, and blessed with a beautiful singing voice and a natural talent for storytelling. As a young man, he found employment in the household of Theobald, the Archbishop of Canterbury, where his duties included entertaining visitors and performing at religious ceremonies. Thomas was everything a medieval entertainer needed to be. He could sing, he could tell stories, he could engage in witty conversation with people of all social levels. But he also had something extra, a quick mind and an instinctive understanding of politics that caught the attention of the most powerful people in England. When Henry II became king in 1154, he was looking for advisors who combined intelligence with loyalty. Thomas Becket, the entertaining young clerk from the Archbishop's household, seemed perfect for the role. Henry appointed him as his chancellor, essentially the second most powerful position in the kingdom. The 2 young men, Henry was only 21, Thomas about 36, became inseparable. They hunted together, dined together, planned military campaigns together. Thomas had gone from being a hired entertainer to being the king's closest friend and advisor. It was a rise in status so dramatic that it must have seemed like something from one of the romantic tales he used to sing. As chancellor, Thomas lived like a prince. He wore the finest clothes, owned hundreds of horses, employed a household staff that numbered in the hundreds. When he traveled to France on diplomatic missions, his entourage was so magnificent that people lined the roads just to watch him pass. The former minstrel had become one of the most powerful men in Europe, but then Henry made a decision that would change everything. When the Archbishop of Canterbury died in 1162, Henry decided to appoint his friend Thomas to the position. It seemed like a logical choice. Who could be more loyal than someone who owed everything to the king's favor? Henry had completely misunderstood his friend. The moment Thomas became archbishop, he underwent a transformation so complete it shocked everyone who knew him. He gave away his luxurious possessions, dressed in simple robes, wore a hair shirt beneath his vestments, and became the most zealous defender of church rights against royal interference that England had ever seen. The friendship between Henry and Thomas turned into one of the most dramatic political conflicts of the medieval period. 2 men who had once been as close as brothers became bitter enemies. Thomas, the former entertainer who had charmed his way into the royal court, now stood as the primary obstacle to Henry's plans for controlling the English church. The conflict escalated for 8 years, with Thomas spending several years in exile in France, Henry growing increasingly frustrated with his former friend's stubborn independence. The situation reached its climax in December 1170, when Henry, in a moment of rage, supposedly cried out, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" 4 knights took this as a royal command. They rode to Canterbury Cathedral, where they found Thomas preparing for evening prayers. On the steps of the altar, in one of the most sacred places in England, they hacked him to death with their swords. The murder sent shockwaves across Europe. Thomas was quickly declared a martyr and saint. His tomb became one of the most important pilgrimage sites in Christendom. Henry, overwhelmed by guilt, walked barefoot to Canterbury and submitted to being flogged by monks as penance for his role in the death. And so the minstrel, who had sung for his supper in the Archbishop's hall, ultimately became St. Thomas of Canterbury, one of the most famous saints in medieval Christianity. It's a story that encompasses the full range of medieval entertainment and politics, from the uncertain life of a traveling performer to the heights of royal favor, to the ultimate sacrifice of martyrdom. Thomas Becket's story reminds us that in the medieval world, entertainment and politics were never completely separate. A good storyteller could influence public opinion. A skilled performer could gain access to the most powerful circles. And sometimes, someone who started by amusing others could end by changing the course of history. But not all court entertainers had such dramatic careers. Some found their niche in far more unusual specialties. Let me tell you about Roland le Péteur, whose stage name translates roughly as Roland the Farter. Roland served King Henry II, the same Henry who had been Thomas Becket's friend, and his special talent was performing what medieval records delicately describe as a leap, a whistle, and a fart, all simultaneously. This might sound ridiculous to us, but Roland's act was apparently so popular and technically proficient that the king granted him a substantial estate in Suffolk in payment for his services. Yes, there is a person in medieval history who became wealthy through the professional, controlled emission of intestinal gas. Roland held his land on the condition that he perform his signature act every Christmas for the royal court. Medieval life was apparently both more and less sophisticated than we sometimes imagine. Beyond the court, jesters, and royal entertainers, there existed a vast network of traveling performers who brought entertainment to the masses. These included acrobats, animal trainers, musicians, storytellers, and specialists in arts that we've largely forgotten. Animal trainers were particularly popular, and their shows could draw crowds from miles around. The most famous were the bear wards, men who traveled with trained bears that could dance to music, walk on their hind legs, and perform simple tricks. Picture such a performance in a village market square. The bear ward plays a simple melody on a wooden pipe or a hurdy-gurdy, a mechanical stringed instrument that produces a droning, somewhat mournful sound. The bear, a massive creature that would be terrifying in the wild, stands on its hind legs and sways to the music, its movements constrained by heavy chains but still recognizably dance-like. To modern sensibilities, this represents obvious animal cruelty. but to medieval audiences who had rarely, if ever, seen large wild animals, a dancing bear was nothing short of miraculous. It represented the triumph of human intelligence over brute nature, the possibility that even the wildest creatures could be tamed and civilized. The bear wards lived hard lives, constantly traveling, always dependent on the cooperation of an animal that could kill them with a single swipe of its paw. They slept outdoors in all weather, earned barely enough to feed themselves and their bears, and faced the constant risk that their animal might injure or kill a spectator, an event that could result in their own execution. Yet these performances were among the most popular entertainments of the medieval world. A dancing bear could draw crowds that would make a modern rock concert look modest. Entire villages would empty out to watch the show, and people would travel for days to see a particularly famous bear performer. The trainers developed remarkably sophisticated relationships with their animals. They had to understand bear psychology, behavior, and physical needs. They became experts in animal medicine, nutrition, and training techniques. In many ways, they were the predecessors of modern animal behaviorists, though their methods and goals were very different from what we would consider ethical today. There were also dog trainers who specialized in teaching domestic animals to perform elaborate tricks. Dogs that could walk on their hind legs, jump through hoops, perform simple mathematical calculations by barking the correct number of times. Monkey trainers who worked with exotic animals imported from Africa or Asia, teaching them to wear human clothing and perform parodies of human behavior. These animal acts served as more than simple entertainment. They provided a form of education about the natural world for people who lived entirely within agricultural communities. A peasant who had never seen anything more exotic than a domestic pig could watch a monkey trainer's show and gain some understanding of the incredible diversity of life that existed beyond their immediate experience. Perhaps the most important entertainers, though, were the storytellers, the men and women who preserved and transmitted the cultural memory of medieval society. These weren't just people who told amusing tales to pass the time. They were the librarians of an oral culture, the keepers of history and legend and moral instruction. A master storyteller carried in their memory hundreds of tales, stories of ancient kings and heroes, tales of saints and miracles, legends of distant lands, and magical creatures. They could recite epic poems that took hours to complete, remembering not just the basic plot, but thousands of lines of verse, complex character relationships, intricate details of description and dialogue. These performers were walking libraries, human databases of cultural information. In a world where most people couldn't read, where books were rare and expensive, storytellers provided access to literature, history, philosophy, and entertainment all in one package. They also served as moral instructors, using their tales to teach lessons about proper behavior, social obligation, and spiritual truth. A skilled storyteller could make a sermon about charity more compelling than any priest, could teach a lesson about loyalty more effectively than any knight, could inspire virtue more powerfully than any philosopher. The best storytellers developed distinctive styles that made their performances unforgettable. Some specialized in terrifying tales of demons and monsters, told with such vivid detail that audiences would be afraid to walk home alone through dark streets. Others focused on romantic stories of courtly love, spinning tales of noble knights and beautiful ladies that would make their listeners sigh with longing. Still others became famous for their comic tales, stories of bumbling fools pompous clergy, unfaithful wives, and cunning peasants that would have their audiences roaring with laughter. These comic storytellers served an important social function, providing a safe way to criticize authority figures and social pretensions. The relationship between storyteller and audience was intimate and collaborative. A good storyteller read their audience constantly, adjusting their performance based on the crowd's reaction. If people seemed bored, they would add more action or humor. If they seemed engaged, they might elaborate on descriptive passages or character development. If children were present, they would moderate content appropriately. Audiences, in turn, participated actively in the performance. They would cheer heroes, boo villains, gasp at surprising plot developments, and laugh at jokes. The boundary between performer and audience was much more permeable than in our modern entertainment culture. As the evening grew late, as the last songs were sung and the final stories told, these wandering entertainers would gather their few possessions and prepare for another night's rest in whatever shelter they could find. Tomorrow would bring another road, another town, another audience to win over with their skills and stories. They carried no wealth except their talents, owned no property except their instruments and costumes, claimed no status except what they could earn fresh each day through their performances. Yet in many ways, they were among the freest people in the medieval world. They answered to no lord, owed no feudal obligations, could travel where they pleased and leave when they chose. More importantly, they were the connective tissue of medieval culture. They carried songs from one end of Europe to the other, spread stories across linguistic and political boundaries, created a shared cultural vocabulary that transcended the divisions of class, nationality, and region. The knight who listened to a minstrel's song in his castle and the peasant who heard the same song in a village tavern were participating in the same cultural experience. The lady who laughed at a jester's joke and the merchant who heard a similar joke at a market fair were connected by invisible threads of shared humor and understanding. These traveling entertainers created community on a scale that medieval people could barely imagine. Through their songs and stories, they made a fragmented, localized world feel connected and coherent. They reminded people that despite their differences in wealth, status, and circumstance, they shared fundamental human experiences of joy, sorrow, love, loss, hope, and fear. As we reach the end of our journey through the strange and wonderful world of medieval entertainment, let yourself settle deeper into relaxation. Feel your breathing slow and deepen. Allow your body to become heavy and comfortable, sinking into the softness of your bed like a tired traveler, finally reaching a safe inn after a long day's journey. The medieval world we've explored tonight, the world of clashing knights and dancing bears, of village festivals and traveling storytellers, is fading now like a dream upon waking. But perhaps some small part of it will remain with you. A reminder that human beings have always found ways to create joy from hardship, to build community through shared laughter, to transform the ordinary world into something magical through the power of imagination and performance. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the echoes of lute strings and the distant sound of laughter around a fire, with stories that have been told for centuries and songs that will never truly die.